Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a closer look, really digging into the advanced air mobility scene in Asia.
That's right. And our guide for this is the agenda from the recent AAM Asia Symposium.
Yeah, think of it as our inside track. We're aiming to give you a snapshot of the key developments, the challenges, and, the opportunities popping up across Asia in this really fast-moving field.
And it was a pretty comprehensive agenda. You had the manufacturers, the OEMs, building the actual eVTOLs, the operators planning to fly them, the regulators, government bodies, the infrastructure folks figuring out the landing spots. A real mix.
So our mission here is basically to pull out the most important bits from all those discussions, give you a clear overview of what's really going on with AAM in Asia and why you should care without getting totally bogged down in technical jargon.
Let's do it. So where do we start? The OEMs, the manufacturers?
Yeah, seems like a good place. The agenda definitely put a spotlight on them getting ready for the Asian market. Sounds like certification was a huge focus, getting that official safety approval.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Certification's everything. And tied to that, their timelines for actually starting service, the entry into service, or EIS, in different Asian countries.
Okay. And was there anything particularly tricky discussed there?
Well, one challenge that kept coming up was how the certification standards aren't quite uniform across Asia.
Ah, right.
Unlike, say, EASA in Europe or the FAA in the US, where there's a more unified approach, OEMs targeting Asia might face this patchwork of different requirements. That definitely adds complexity if you want to scale across the region.
I can imagine. Okay, so that's the aircraft manufacturers. What about the companies planning to actually fly these things, the operators?
Yeah, that was another big chunk. How are the Asian operators preparing for their own EIS?
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to have the cool new aircraft.
All right.
It's another to build a business around it that actually works.
Makes sense. So what kind of operational stuff were they talking about?
Well, costs, obviously. Buying the aircraft, maintaining them, training pilots, and ground crew. Big investments.
And finding the money for all that, I guess.
Exactly. Financing was a key topic. How do you get these new airlines essentially funded and then scale them up successfully? Lots to figure out there.
Okay, so you've got the planes, you've got operators planning businesses, but they need somewhere to, operate from, right?
Precisely. Which brings us to infrastructure. Vertiports.
Vertiports. The agenda mentioned vertiports integration. What does that really mean?
It means figuring out the best places to put these mini airports. In city centers, at existing airports, maybe other spots. And it's not just finding space. It's the challenges of building them, integrating them smoothly into the urban fabric, dealing with noise, public acceptance, all that.
Yeah, lots of practical hurdles.
And that's just the physical side. The symposium also really dug into the digital infrastructure needed.
Okay, like what?
Think air traffic control, but for potentially hundreds or thousands of these smaller aircraft flying at lower altitudes, often in busy cities.
Wow, okay.
So you need the traditional air traffic management, ATM, but also this newer concept, unmanned traffic management, or UTM. Plus, you need the radio spectrum for communication, the comms tech itself. It's a whole digital layer to make it work safely.
Oh, got it. And powering these things, they're mostly electric, right?
Predominantly, yes.
Yeah.
So providing power to AM was on the agenda. How do national grids cope with the extra demand? And, of course, the constant progress needed in battery technology, more range, faster charging. That's vital.
Which kind of raises a question. Is everywhere ready for fully electric right away?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And the agenda reflected that uncertainty.
Yeah.
There was talk about hybrid power in AM.
Ah, so like part electric, part traditional fuel.
Exactly. It could be a really important stepping stone. Hybrids might offer better range or payload capacity initially, which could be crucial for some of the diverse needs across Asia, longer distances, different terrains.
Yeah. Interesting. So not just all electric from day one necessarily.
Potentially not everywhere, no. And looking even further ahead, they discussed hydrogen in Asia.
Hydrogen for aviation.
Yeah, it's seen as a potential long-term clean fuel. It sounds like there's already work happening in Asia exploring how hydrogen could be produced, stored, and used for aviation in the future.
Okay, so they're thinking long-term energy too.
Definitely. And they didn't forget the really practical stuff either, like weather.
Weather, how so?
Well, there was a session on the importance of weather for AAM operations. Makes sense, right? These are smaller aircraft, potentially more sensitive to conditions. So you need really good real-time weather data fed directly into those ATM and UTM systems to keep flights safe and on schedule.
Right, can't fly through a thunderstorm in a small eVTOL.
Probably not advisable, no.
Okay, so we've got manufacturers, operators, infrastructure, power. Who's making the rules for all this? The governments and regulators?
Yep, critical piece. The agenda showed involvement from major players. JCA from Japan, KOCA from Korea, DGCA, which is likely India, CAAS from Singapore, plus input from Europe's EASA, the US FAA, and even GCAA, probably the UAE.
So a lot of different authorities involved. What were they focused on?
The big things. How do we certify these completely new types of aircraft? How do we regulate how they operate safely? And crucially, how do we get some alignment, some harmonization between the rules in different countries?
That harmonization point seems key again. You don't want wildly different rules everywhere if these things are going to fly across borders, or even just for manufacturers selling regionally.
Exactly. It's a huge challenge, but vital for the industry's growth.
Was there mention of specific government support?
Yes, definitely. They highlighted Japanese government support, mentioning specific roundtables with different prefectures in Japan that are actually planning to introduce AAM. That local level buy-in seems really important.
Interesting. Not just national, but regional governments, too.
And there was a broader session on government support throughout Asia, suggesting this isn't just isolated pockets. Many governments seem to see the potential and are actively trying to help make it happen. Funding, policies, setting up the right regulatory environment.
It really shows how interconnected it all is, doesn't it? The tech development needs the regulations need the government support.
Absolutely. They have to move forward together.
Okay, so then the agenda seemed to zoom in on specific countries and regions. What were some of the highlights there?
Yeah, they looked at progress updates. For instance, Osaka Expo AAM demos and AAM in Japan.
So real-world trials happening.
Seems like it. And the focus was on progress, sure, but also the challenges they're hitting and the lessons they're learning. That's invaluable.
Learning by doing, essentially.
Exactly. And that pattern repeated. There was the KUAM challenge and AAM in Korea. Updates from China and its low-altitude economy that's seen as a potentially huge market, obviously.
Right.
Then progress reports from Australia and New Zealand, India, Indonesia. It paints a picture of activity right across the continent, though clearly everyone's at slightly different stages, facing their own specific issues.
It's quite a mosaic of development. So beyond just if they can fly, what about how they'll be used, the actual applications?
Good question. That was covered under AAM use cases for Asia. It's about figuring out, okay, what problems can this technology actually solve in an Asian context? Is it mostly about beating traffic in cities, the urban air mobility idea?
That's the one you hear about most often.
It is, but it's wider than that. Think cargo delivery, maybe urgent medical transport to remote areas, inspecting infrastructure like pipelines or wind turbines.
Okay, lots of possibilities.
Definitely. The discussion was likely around which of these use cases make the most sense first in Asia and when we might realistically see them become common.
And there's something about military use, too.
Yes, a mention of potential AAM military use cases, as seen by the Japan Self-Defense Forces.
That adds another layer. Military interest can sometimes accelerate development, can't it?
It often does, yes.
Yeah.
Dual-use technologies tend to attract more funding and strategic focus.
Okay, so we're nearing the end of the agenda topics. What about the really practical day-to-day operational stuff?
Right, making it all work smoothly. There was a session on operationalizing UTM. How do you actually roll out and scale up these new traffic management systems for the lower airspace?
That sounds incredibly complex, integrating a whole new type of traffic.
Monumental task.
Yeah.
From prototypes to full deployment. And then keeping the aircraft flying. Fly, and maintain?
That's true.
How is the Asian MRO sector preparing?
MRO?
Maintenance, repair, and overhaul. Basically, the aviation mechanics and workshops. Are there enough skilled people and facilities in Asia ready to look after these sophisticated new aircraft? It's a critical piece of the logistics puzzle.
Yeah, you need the support structure. Can't just have fancy planes with no one to fix them.
Precisely. And finally, they looked at the AM supply chain in Asia. Who's building the components? The batteries, the motors, the sensors. Are Asian suppliers stepping up? Are they investing? Building that local supply chain is really important for the industry's long-term health in the region.
Makes sense. Keeps things resilient, builds local expertise.
Exactly. Less reliance on imports, more economic benefit regionally.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Looking back at everything covered in that symposium agenda, what are the main takeaways for you?
Well, I think a few big themes emerge clearly. There's a really strong push towards getting certified and actually starting service. That EIS goal is driving a lot.
Right.
Second, the absolute necessity of building out the infrastructure, both the physical vertiports and that complex digital UTM layer. They have to happen together. Third, governments and regulators across Asia are definitely not just watching from the sidelines, they're actively involved trying to shape.
That seems crucial.
It is. Fourth, you see this varied progress across the continent. Different countries, different paces, different challenges, but definite momentum building.
Yeah, it's not monolithic.
Not at all. And finally, there's this growing realization and focus on the practicalities, the day-to-day operations, the maintenance, the supply chain, getting beyond the concept stage.
So it really feels like things are moving from just drawing board concepts towards actual implementation, even with all the hurdles.
I think that's a fair assessment, yes. Yeah, this agenda really gives a snapshot of that transition. It highlights just how interconnected everything is, the technology, the rules, the market development. They all have to align for AAM to really take off in Asia.
It's been fascinating to unpack this. It gives such a clear sense of the current state of play. Okay, so here's a final thought for you listening in. We've heard about all this diverse activity and different priorities across Asia. What unique AAM application do you predict will be the first to really gain widespread use in the region? Will it be city air taxis, cargo drones, something else entirely? And thinking longer term, what kind of changes might we see in society as these aircraft potentially become more common? Definitely something to ponder as this whole field continues to evolve. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.